Shalom Aleichem, everybody. And today is a solemn day in world history and in Jewish history. It's something we don't forget and never should be forgotten. Today and yesterday was the beginning of the march of what we call the Auschwitz death camp death marches. And what they did is they forced evacuations of Auschwitz because the Soviet Union troops were coming in. The Nazis were losing the war. And now let's just say the Nazis, they knew they were not going to win, but they wanted it to end well. They were willing to make deals. They were willing to sell out. And they didn't want people to know exactly what was going on. Although the Soviets knew. The United States government knew, but they kind of looked away. Same with Britain. They really didn't care. They never took action against the death camps. They knew they were there. They never took any action against them. They didn't bomb the railroads going there. And a lot of the American troops, and the Allied troops, when they would come up on the death camps after it was all said and done, they thought they were Nazi training facilities, so they were on high alert. And then you can only imagine what they saw when they walked in there. And most of them will tell you, we had no idea. Even their commanding officer said we didn't know what was going on. Because the United States government didn't care. I can go there, man. I can tell you all about FDR was not a good person. FDR was not a good president. He was a racist, and he didn't like Jews, and he kept them out of the country. Matter of fact, his sister-in-law said letting little Jews in, well, they're just going to grow up and be old big Jews, so let's not let them in. But the Soviet forces were approaching, and the Soviets knew what was going on, and I give the Soviets a lot of credit, because if anybody took a hit in that war, it was them. It was awful what they went through. It's awful what anybody went through, but it's awful what these mostly Jewish prisoners of war, they called them. They weren't prisoners of war. They were just there because they're Jewish. They didn't like them. They wanted to get their grand scheme going in, with the Aryan race and all that good crap. So what they did is they evacuated Auschwitz and all the sub-camps because they knew the war was coming to an end. They wanted to downplay everything. But here's another thing. The Nazis kept very good records of everything. They kept records of the people. They kept records of what they were in for. And they would make stuff up. They say, oh, they're in for prostitution. She's 6 years old, okay? Come on. They tried to make it look bad, They didn't like the communists. They didn't like anybody who stood up against them. That's why they didn't like the Soviet Union, because they were communist at that time. And Hitler's biggest mistake in that war, he had a deal in the beginning with Stalin. And he said, hey, man, you let me do what I want, and we won't fight you, you won't fight us. And he's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I got no problem with that. But when Hitler went after them, and when they encountered the Russian winter is what was the worst thing for them. Soviet winter. But that's when everything changed. If he hadn't gone after them, I really think Hitler would have overtaken all of Europe. Russia, if Russia had backed him, I think so, because he already had Japan, and Japan controlled China, Taiwan, all the Asian countries over there. I really think World War II, Hitler would have won. And that's horrific to even think about. Now, I don't know how the United States would have done on that, because we are far away from everybody else, but I don't want to know. And I'm glad they didn't. So what had happened is, leading up to the Russians, they knew the Soviets. I'll say Soviets, that's what they were back then. We all know the Russians now. But leading up to that, the Soviets were coming, and they knew they were days away still. But they didn't have enough troops to protect the area. So they emptied the death camps out. And they figured, we're going to hide all this. We don't want people to know what we did. So they marched them. They marched them in the cold snow. These people were sick and depraved of food to begin with. Deprived, that's what the Nazis were. But anyway, and they would march them, and these people would die along the way. They dropped dead. If you couldn't keep up, they shot you dead. They didn't care. They laughed about it. It's documented. It's all true. Everything I'm telling you is 1,000% true. Now, before leading up to the days that they did this, they started killing a bunch of them. They upped all the deaths, started gassing them, and started, doing everything they did to them. I hate thinking about it because it's disgusting. They baked them alive in ovens, okay? They did a lot of horrible things. And don't let the people in the area fool you. They knew what was going on. So they killed thousands in the camps. And then the death marches came. And they were mostly Jewish people in there at this time in those camps, especially in Auschwitz. And they were forced to march. They went northwest. Well, everybody's on the metric system at the United States. So I'm going to tell you, they went 30 miles. 30 miles you're marching with just a jacket on, if that, to a place called Gliwice. And they were going to join them with other prisoners. They were trying to hide all this out. And there was all these other camps out there, like Birchmarkel and Althammer and Hindenburg. And they walked west, and about 35 miles to another place, Loslau. And that was in Silesia. And then they joined them all together. Now, on the way, there were 60,000 people. About 15,000 died. If you couldn't keep up, they shot you dead. They shot you dead and left you on the side of the road. They didn't care. The SS guards shot anyone that fell behind and could not continue. Prisoners also suffered from, it's cold weather, people. It's Germany in the winter. You think it's cold here in the United States? Try going to Germany in the winter. That's why their ski team's so good. But they shot anybody. They were freezing to death. They got frostbite. They starved to death because they're already starving. So then 3,000 of them died on the way to the nearest death camp. And there's about 15,000 that died just from Auschwitz. Now, they were taking away other camps. They took people out of the other camps too. And they were marching them all over the place, trying to hide them. And about 250,000 people, mostly Jews, died on those death marches. And we remember that today. This took place on the 17th and 18th of January. It's just horrific to think that somebody would go after a group of people just because of their race and religion. And I will tell you this before somebody says, Judaism is a religion. No, Judaism is an ethno-religion. It is an ethnicity and a religion. It's both. You are born with Jewish blood in you. You know the DNA test? You know what those come back as? It'll tell you you're Jewish. And people say, well, they're white, so they couldn't be Jewish. They're Ashkenazic. That means German Jew, European Jew, Sephardic Jews. Those are basically your Spanish Jews because they were kicked out of Israel because they weren't allowed to be in their homeland, so they had to scatter. And people sit there and they dog them out for no reason. They were put in these camps for no freaking reason. Do you know what the Nazis did? They started this in 1933. It actually started before that, but it became official in 1933 when Hitler took over. What they did was they didn't make it to where the Jews couldn't vote anymore. They didn't make it to where, they couldn't own a gun. They didn't take that right from them. They took their citizenship from them. So if you lived in Germany for 300 years, you lost your citizenship. You got a nice farm that you worked hard for and built. Too bad. Only citizens of Germany can own a house. So therefore, they took it. You can't own a gun. You can't own this. You can't vote. You can't run for public office. Matter of fact, you're not allowed in this store because we took your rights away. They took their rights away. And when I think about that, and I look at society today in a lot of these countries, I see the same thing happening today. A lot of things haven't changed very much, have they? Now, a major Soviet offensive came out in 1944, and they started taking over some things, and they knew what was going on. Like I said, they knew what was going on with those camps because they took care of things. They were smart. They were the closest to it. I will say this again. If it had not been for the Soviet Union, the Nazis probably would have won and taken over Europe. They would have controlled all that stuff. They would have spread to Africa because they were fighting there. And the only person that they didn't like blacks, so they would have killed them too. But the only person they didn't like, or that they did like, they liked the muftis in the Middle East. They liked those guys. Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think Hitler and the boys liked all those guys so much? Stop and think about it, people. They're Islam. They're Muslims. Who do they hate? Who do they hate more than anything? The Jews. I mean, and it's sad, man. It's sad. Now, the SS, they did whatever they could to keep the prisoners to fall into enemy hands because they could tell their stories to the liberators. And the SS thought they needed prisoners to maintain production of the armaments because they were. You're going out there and you're building the armaments that are killing your people and killing all these people who are trying to save you. And honestly, for a lot of cultures and a lot of countries back then, it wasn't about saving the Jews. Like I said, they didn't know about the death camps. They were just going after the Nazis. It was us versus them. Many people really didn't know about what was going on and the atrocities and how bad it was. Europe knew. People in Poland, Hungary, Denmark, they knew. But then again, some of those guys were on the sides of the Nazis, and they can say, well, they came in and took us over. You didn't fight very hard, did you? Hitler took over Poland in a weekend. Give me a break, man. So many of the SS leaders, including Himmler, they believed they could use the prisoners as hostages and they could bargain. And they could get a separate peace agreement, give them their freedom so they wouldn't be hanged or, assassinated and stuff. So they wanted this. They tried to do all this, but it didn't work. So they started doing all kinds of stuff. They cut off, like in the Baltic states, they cut off things with ships. The Allies started reaching areas they didn't think they could. They started coming in through the skies. So that's when they started the Death March. So they figured, you know what? If we get caught, we'll try to negotiate. If not, they'll be dead on the way. No big deal. It's not going to hurt us at all. It was a horrific thing that happened back then. And I'll tell you straight up. Again, the Soviet Union lost more than anybody else in that war. Not just property, but they had the most highest rate of civilian deaths. They had the highest rate of deaths, highest rate of military deaths. They lost a lot of people. They estimate about 27 million people, 27 million Soviet Russian people died. And about 8.6 million were military. I mean, that's horrible. I can't even imagine that. That is more than every other country that was fighting in there. That's more than all of them combined. Just the military deaths are more than all of them combined. It was horrible. They lost a lot of people because they were so close. There was a lot of people were considered they were so-called prisoners of war. But if you were a communist, if you were a Russian and you weren't a Nazi, they'd take you in. They had millions of people died in the German camps. They're the second highest number next to the Jews, which was 6 million. It's probably a little more than that, but those are what the records show. And trust me, the records are accurate, people. So don't even get me started on that crap where people say, it never happened. So the Soviet Union had a lot. China had about 3.5 million military deaths. They were the next closest. United Kingdom had about 340,000. United States had about 416,000. Poland, 240,000. And there's more and more and more. Yugoslavia had about 440,000. There were a lot of countries involved. And, altogether, about 21 million people. A lot of those were prisoners of war. And on both sides. The Allies took prisoners of war too. They won't tell you this, but they did. They took a lot of prisoners of war and they executed them. And they did a lot of bad stuff to them too. But the winners, to the victor goes the spoils. You're not going to hear about that at all. So this was the war that had the highest death count ever in the history of the world. It supposedly was the war to end all wars. We've had wars since then. We haven't had a world war. I hope we never do because they got nuclear capability now. And here's the thing, too. After the war, we were kind of trying to be buddies with the Soviet Union, but that didn't really work out because we treated them like dirt. Because before that, we didn't have the technology and the spy capability that we have today. So we didn't know how many people they had or how good their war machine was and stuff. And so afterwards, that is when the Cold War started. That is when the stuff came out about the Soviet Union. They're communists. We have to hate communism. I mean, that's been a big thing for years and years and years. But it got really worse after World War II because we figured out, hey, these guys can kick our butts. These guys got technology. Germany had a lot of technology. They were kind of advanced in technology. And people, that is where Operation Paperclip comes in for the United States. They were basically, oh, you're a Nazi scientist. You've killed a bunch of Jews. You've killed a bunch of people. You experimented on children. Well, will you come help us in America? Do some stuff. It's like, yeah. Sieg Heil. No. Don't do the Sieg Heil. We'll protect you. We'll take good care of you. They did. They brought all these Nazis over here. Nazis that had killed children. Nazis that experimented on children. Nazis that did all kinds of nasty stuff. But hey, you can help us, so it's okay. But hey, you hate the Soviets too, right? Right, because they're communist and they could probably kick our butts, and that's what the Cold War was all about. I grew up listening to all this stuff about Russia, Soviet Union, Russia, and that's all I ever heard was negative stuff, and I'm like, but they're people just like us. I had people I grew up with from Russia. I got friends now from Russia. I wouldn't mind going to Russia. It sounds like a pretty cool place. Sounds like a nice place. Everybody's nice, friendly. The women are beautiful. Russian women are gorgeous. I'm like, wow, what are you doing? Building them in a machine over there or something? You're doing a great job, whatever you're doing. But, you hear about how bad it was. We used to always hear about Russia, communists. You hate communists. I know communists. I know people that are communists. I got no problem with them. They respect me. I respect them. You can believe whatever you want. Because you know why? This is America. This is the United States of America, people. A thing where freedom, I don't know about that anymore, freedom usually ruled. But that's gone. Stay tuned next because I'm going to go off on that pretty good. But we've lost our way. They still go after, if somebody's good with Putin, they're like, well, we hate him because he likes Putin. Well, I personally want to stay on Putin's good side. He has nuclear capability, and I don't think he's afraid to use it. I stay on the Chinese good side, except for all the crap they put in our stores. We should be building stuff here, people. But this got to understand what's going on. There's a lot of stuff in this world, and people don't care about certain things. China's going after Taiwan. Taiwan's a cash cow to them. Taiwan has good money-making ability there. There's some money to be made there, and China knows it. But you don't see anybody stepping up and helping them out, do you? But Russia does something. Ukraine attacks them. Russia goes back after them. And it's like, how dare they attack the Ukraine? Let's give them billions of dollars. So basically, we're fighting a war. We've given Ukraine about $200 billion. And hey, can Zelensky actually put on like a nice clean shirt or something? He looks like he came off the street corner begging for change. I think I gave him $1 one day. For real, I think I did, man. I'm serious. It's like probably used it to go after Russia more. But, it's ridiculous how they do that. I got people in my city sleeping in the streets. Yeah, we're going to give billions to these guys? Why? We're fighting a war with Russia. We're not in there. We're just in there with the money. That's what they want. And people, let me tell you, the Auschwitz death march, it was horrible. The whole death march of all the concentration camps was horrific. The fact that there were concentration camps and they did what they did to innocent people. They took little children and they gassed them. They took little children. And Dr. Joseph Mengele, he would take twins. And I know a lot of twins. You do this to any of my twin friends. Oh, you look out, man. You're going to see angry old boy. But they would take twins. They'd bring them in and they'd kill one to see if the other would die. Whoops, nope, that doesn't work. And they'd do other things like they put 3 arms on people to see if that would work. I mean, they destroyed people's lives. The people would die. They didn't care. They were experimenting. There were some things that they worked on, but they weren't curing diseases. That's for damn sure. They didn't care about none of that stuff. All they cared about was trying to make the perfect race. Now, if they could get a third arm to work, the guy they put it on was Jewish, so they'd kill him afterwards and say, all right, we can do this now. Let's put it on one of our people. That's what they did, man. But there's people that honor these guys. There's people that love and respect them. And what I'm seeing in the United States and in America today, I have never seen so much anti-Jewish hatred in my life. I am seeing so much people hating on Jews for no freaking reason. No reason. Just because that's what they're taught. That's what they're taught. And people say, are the Jews? They come up with every stereotype in the past. They've been kicked out of 109 countries. No, they haven't. The Jews left a lot of countries because they were forced to. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Spain kicked out every Jew. You could either convert to Catholicism, leave, or die. Now, how would you feel if the United States did that to you and you were a legal citizen, been living there for years and years and years? These are Sephardic Jews that have probably been living there for 500 to 1,000 years ever since Rome took over in the early Common Era. And now you're telling them you got to convert or die. A lot of Jews did convert. They're like, oh, yeah, give me the little beads there, the anal beads or whatever. Yeah, I got beads. Looky here, man. Get the Torah out, son. You know, they did a good job of hiding. But how would you feel if somebody did that to you because of your faith, because of your race? How would you feel if they came up right now and said, all the Irish have to get out of America? Why? Just because we don't like you because you got a reputation for fighting and drinking. Am I wrong? I mean, you did name your college football team the Fighting Irish. There's nothing more stereotypical than that. That's a little rude if you ask me, but hey, whatever. The Irish don't care. Whatever. But how would you feel if they did that to you? Yeah, stop and think about it, people. That's what's going on in the United States right now. Have you seen all the attacks on Jews? Every day there's something. There's always a house getting attacked, a person getting attacked, a Jew getting jumped, synagogues getting burned down. All you see on social media is hatred against Jews. And for what? For why? What did the Jews ever do to anybody? What have they done? Let's see. They cured diseases. They created technology. Most of the technology that you listen to or use on a daily basis. You got a television? That was the Jews. If you don't like Jews, might not want to watch any more TV and buy it while you're at it. Put the remote down. That was Jews. They made stuff like chemotherapy. That's just helped save thousands and probably millions of lives. They've done a lot of good things, people. What have you all done lately? What has your culture done lately? So I'm tired of hearing all this hatred. That's why we remember things. We don't forget because we're not going to let it happen again. Germany. Now the Germans they don't embrace it. They don't embrace it. They're not proud of it. But, and I have a lot of respect for Germany for this, they make it a memorial site. They talk about what happened. They have passed laws to where you can't put your arm in the air. You can't say "see how." They see a swastika, you're going to prison. They ain't playing. And they'll tell you, we didn't do it. Our forefathers did. And we're sorry it happened. Just like slavery in the United States. They put it out there and they say, we didn't do it, but here's what happened. We're not going to let it happen again. Learn from it. And that's what Germany does. They say, wasn't us. But we're not going to deny it. We're not denying that it happened because it did. But we're not going to let it happen again. And I respect them for that. And that's why we always say, never forget, never again. And I will tell you this, most Jews never forgive. Peace.